Hi there, and welcome to PodRocket, a web development podcast brought to you by LogRocket. My name is Paul, and today I'm here with Kilian Valkhof. He is the founder at Polypane, and we're not here to talk necessarily about Polypane, but we're here to talk about browser APIs. And this is a fun topic because sometimes we get folks on here and we talk about what's built into these amazing tools that we have, and this is one of those podcasts. We're going to be talking about the Internationalization API. Whew, that's a mouthful. I got a little confused there. And some of the other great things that maybe we're not taking the most advantage of. So welcome to the podcast, Killian. It's great to have you.
Thanks for having me.
What we're talking about today, which is
internationalization.
Boom! He got it. This is my second try. I'm going to stop trying from here on out. And everything we're going to talk about today is also on YouTube. Killian has like a 20-something minute talk up there. It's really easy to follow. So any of the stuff we're talking about, specifics, you can go check out the YouTube video and we can put it in the link of the show notes if you want a second rundown. So in general, I think the topic is people don't use this side of browsers and the superpowers that they provide us. And it's because of a bunch of different reasons. Yeah. I'd love to hear about some of the core reasons. But before we get into those reasons, what are these APIs? Why are they so important? And why are they living in this Goldilocks zone, Killian, of like, you guys should really look at these because the opportunity cost is so high?
Internationalization, the API is available on window.intl, which is short for internationalization, which I can say this well because I've done it many, many times in front of a mirror, in front of a recording device, practicing.
You're killing it.
There's other words that I can say really easily, specificity, things like that, because, you just have to at some point. You just have to sit down and say it 100 times, and then you can do it. But yeah, so internationalization is an API that a lot of developers don't think to look at because they think you don't need internationalization when your site is just in one language, which makes sense, right? Internationalization is for doing things internationally across multiple nations, across multiple languages, etc., etc. But that's not really what the API is. The API is really just this huge formatting library, a string formatting library. So say you have some data and you want to format that in a way that's readable to your users, then the INTL library lets you do that. And it lets you do that specifically in the locale, in the language that your user has. And that's the internationalization part. Like you go from a datetime string, which is not like a datetime string is just numbers, right? It's not an American datetime string or a French datetime string. It's just a datetime string. And then to change that into a date that an American user or a French user or a Dutch user can understand, that's where the internationalization part comes in.
Got it. So when you say it's their language, their time zone, their everything, are these because of files, language being cached on the browser that's available to them? As in, like, is this browser API something where you could use all the languages? That sounds like a lot of data.
That's the neat thing. And also, so the reason that I gave a conference talk about this library is because it's poorly named. So people run into an issue where they need to format a date and they think, well, I need a date formatting library for that. And they go off to NPM and they find one and they add many, many kilobytes of string formatting and then also many, many kilobytes of language specific formatting logic. And every user needs to download that. Every user needs to parse that, etc. Whereas with the INTL library, that's just built into the browser. And it's not just for like the 5 most common languages. Like every browser and the total number differs between browser, but like the baseline is every browser that you can install knows about at least 7,000 different locales.
Oh.
And a locale is a combination of a language and a country. So you can imagine you can speak French, but French speakers in France have a different way of speaking and writing than, say, French speakers in Canada. So there's a locale which is Canadian French and a locale which is French French. So that's the 7,000 combinations. So a fair few of them are like English, but like Canadian English, American English, Australian English, UK English, etc., etc.
And so all of these ship with the browser. And
yeah, so they're just built in. They're available wherever your users are. And you don't need to think about that. You don't even need to know what language they use to provide them with a formatting for their language, because you can just ask the browser, like, what language should I use?
And does this compatibility layer extend beyond words?
So there's yes and no.
Okay.
So what trips people up with the INTL library a lot is that they think it also does logic, like it will compare dates, or it will infer language in some way, which it doesn't. It formats strings. It outputs strings. You can't do like math with them. If you want to format time between dates, there's some steps you need to take.
So it's mostly string focused. It's mostly string focused. And if people really want to lean into maybe replacing something that you would have shipped to the client, there are extra steps if you're doing business logic that maybe you need to revisit. But the point is, you should be using this to standardize things so that you can have one central way, because we've all been in the nightmare function of like checking if it's this type of string in this time zone and whatever. So just like, don't do that. That's where you use the Internationalization API.
Excellent.
And then and then you do your business logic. What are some of the libraries that people commonly reach for? And the one that we've touted here on this podcast, we throw around all the time, is date-fns. It's just so it's permeated everywhere. What are some other ones? How do you see those getting replaced or being used in conjunction with this API in a more correct way?
Yeah. So date functions is the big one. Moments.js is the other one. There's one called Luxon, which also does date logic. And then there's Numeral.js, which is for money, for currency things. So all of these are excellent candidates to be like the more friendly wrapper around the INTL library. And the reason many of them aren't are for backwards compatibility, because the INTL library sort of snuck up on everyone. Like it didn't land in browsers like across the board fully formed.
Okay.
So if at any time, like in the past decades, you looked at the INTL library, there might have been the thing you needed, wasn't implemented yet in, say, Safari. And, us developers being developers, we go, fine, then we can't use it. And you move over to date functions, and that just always works. So you don't have a reason to then, redo your work, because why would you? Like, you don't get rewarded for redoing work. Date functions is in there, it works, so you just keep using it. Whereas now, as of 2017, so it's been almost a decade, the entire INTL API is supported in all evergreen browsers. And
do you think that segmented rollout is mostly to blame for why I haven't heard of this all over the place on YouTube? Just as a finger read. I
think so. And I struggled to come up with a clear example now, but you see browsers in the past 4 or so years having more structured rollouts where they all ship a new thing like within months of each other. And I think that really helps adoption because if it's in every browser, you can just forget that you need to think about it, if that makes sense. Whereas if the cool new thing works in Chrome, but you have users on Safari and Firefox, then you're not going to use the cool new thing. You're going to use what works in all browsers. And again, like once that's built, there's zero incentive to rebuild it.
Right.
Generally. So there's not really an upgrade path to all of this. And then the other thing, it's like string formatting is often super specific. Like it's string formatting in most requirements are just like an assumed thing. Like you build a web shop, you need like a checkout, you need a shopping basket. Your project manager isn't going to explain how to format the pricing. But they do expect that, you use the right currency symbol, you use the currency symbol in the right place, which is different across countries, even with the same currency symbol. For example, between the Netherlands and France, here in the Netherlands, we put the euro sign in front of the value. But in France, they always put it at the end of the value. So if you do that differently and then present it to a Dutch or a French user, they would trust your site less because you do something weird that no other site they visit do. So that's stuff you should care about, but that isn't really communicated anywhere in most projects.
It's table stakes.
You can say it's table stakes, but it's also a thing that you don't really. It's like, a fish doesn't know it's wet. I didn't know that the euro sign had such, was that the placement of the euro sign was so country specific until I started testing with the INTL library and it did stuff I didn't expect.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you bump into that earlier if you build like an international web shop. But, preferably you bump into that before users abandon your cart because they don't trust you.
As somebody who is from the ununited States of America, I had no idea that currency switching thing was at the either end of where you put the euro sign.
That's like very culturally specific. But there's even like small stuff where you can probably say that it doesn't matter. Things like, should there be a space between the currency sign and the value? But that also differs per country, per locale. And as like partially a UX designer, I would like to think that, that's doing that wrong over in many places does erode trust. Because again, it's not the same as what you see everywhere else. And at the same time, it's not something I want to know for 7,000 locales. I just want like a thing that fixes it for me, which is the INTL library.
Are there ways that you think the INTL library is not unique in how it is being underleveraged by the community at large from the browser API family? Or is that like your poster child, Killian, of like, this one's the worst? Like people just...
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
And I think that's because, the naming doesn't map to the use case. If you have a problem, you think, I get a date from my backend service that I need to format. So my task is formatting a date. My task isn't like generating a locale-aware string that just happens to use a date as an input. That makes no sense. And there are other things that I think more developers should use, like all the new array functions that make it easier to find stuff quicker, or even when to use sets instead of arrays. Those are all relevant, but they're not user-facing, right? You're not. So if you use an array instead of a set in a situation where an array is slightly slower, that's too bad. But if you like,
something with the wrong currency symbol,
something with the wrong currency, or
that can affect your top line
dates.
Real quick.
In my presentation, I give one very specific example, which is that between most European countries and the US, we flip the day of the month and the month. So if you have like a 01, 02, 2026, for me, that is the 1st of February. But for Americans, that's the 2nd of January, because they do month, day, year, which is weird and makes no sense at all. And we do day, month, year, which like neatly increases in size as you go along. But the default behavior for most date spewing things on the back end is just use the American standard. So if you then present a date formatted that way to someone from Europe, that is incredibly ambiguous until you get to like beyond the 12th day, and then you can deduce it because there's no 13th month. But before that, things can get really dicey, especially in like important communication. Like the example I gave was for the date that your kid was admitted to a primary school. So you want that. You want to know very sure which actual date that is, and not be Kilian and have a weird knowledge of dates across the world and go, well, this doesn't make sense. It's probably the other one because they never bothered to validate their output. I just want to prevent other developers from annoying users with that.
That's a pretty big annoyance, right? Yeah. Like if I get the date wrong by a month because it's under 12, that is not fun.
That doesn't make anyone happy.
Killian, it sounds like you really, of course, it's not sounds like you have been looking at all these browsers, really figuring out what to distill for developers through the lens of Polypane. It led you down this path of going, oh my gosh, the Intl API, huge opportunity, we're missing it. Do you think that there's other areas, maybe they don't yet exist, maybe they're like, there's an RFC out for it or something, of further standardization, further coalescing, stronger ties between the browser fundamental APIs that are coming, they're on their way, or they're not coming, and in the back of your brain, you're just like, guys, what are you doing? Let's talk about this.
I think we're doing pretty well. So if you look at the past decades, before that, and like I'm kind of, this isn't the full truth, but it's like true-ish enough that I can get away with it. But it used to be that people that wrote specifications weren't the people that built the browsers. So specifications for HTML, for CSS, for JavaScript were perfect. But then they weren't
Okay.
As how should HTML work? How should CSS work? How should JavaScript work? But what ended up happening was that it didn't take the real world into account. So lots of those very early, like I'm talking 20, 30 years ago, things never were adopted because they just, they didn't make sense from the implementer's perspective, which in this case is people building browsers, or more specifically, people building rendering engines. But with HTML5, that kind of got flipped, because HTML5 was essentially like browser builders going, well, we need, let's document how the stuff actually works instead of like the pie in the sky perfect representation that none of us actually implement. And from there, you can sort of see an increase in specifications being written to things that developers already use the wrong tools for. We use JavaScript to track the mouse, to when you hover over something, we change the color of the element you hover over. Okay, well, in CSS, that's now hover.
Right.
We use a lot of JavaScript and buttons or just divs with on-click handlers to create accordions. And they work differently on every site in very subtle but potentially annoying ways, especially when you have assistive technologies involved. So let's, instead of that, build a dialog element or a details element that can expand and hide its content and have that be an HTML primitive. And you can see that happen more and more and more. View transitions is a good one. Like, you want to do nice transitions between pages, which ironically is something that IE3 already did, with like a meta tag where you could like side swipe to the next page. I am that old. Yeah. So instead of having you do lots and lots of JavaScript with fetching JSON and then rendering that manually and then playing your animation like fully controlled by JavaScript and then changing the DOM in the right place and having to understand how flip works and all this stuff, like why not just have a browser API that says start transition and then you make the DOM change like instantly and then the browser figures out the animation. That's much nicer, and that immediately shovels away like hundreds of kilobytes of animation code that you no longer need. More recent example is a lot of websites do things based on the scroll position, but handling the scroll position with JavaScript is pretty annoying because you want scrolling to be off the main thread. So that your scrolling doesn't interfere with your JavaScript or your JavaScript interferes with your scrolling because that will lead to a janky experience. But if you want to control things based on the scroll position through JavaScript, you create a link there. So scroll-driven animations or scroll-linked animations. What if we move that to CSS where it can be fully off the main thread and you can just, JavaScript around and have fun, and have your nice scroll-based animations of things that slide in and scroll along, etc. And sometimes it's even like to the benefit of browsers. So for the longest time, browsers have wanted and probably still want to get rid of things like window.confirm, window.alert, window.prompt, because they are actually really weird, because they let you as a website show native UI and you get to decide what to put in there. Like that's very limited. Like you can only put a string in there, but it's browser UI. And that's sort of like a holy separation between web page content and browser content, which is, for example, why if you are in Chrome and a web page requests permissions for, say, your camera, the pop-up that shows is like slightly above your web page content, and it's slightly on top of like the address bar, so that it's like clearly visually outside of the website content, so that it's
okay.
So that if you try to fake it as a website, like give me all the access, then you can't replicate that exactly. So there's like UI considerations there. And those three APIs also have the weird side effect of blocking the main thread. So they are blocking if you call window.prompt, none of your JavaScript executes until the user presses OK, which is weird. But yeah, so that's how they work. Well, now we have the dialogue element, which is like you want dialogues. You want to show like a pop-up that says, do you want to do the thing or not? Yes, cancel. Well, here you go. Here's a way to do that. And we fixed all the annoying parts. The annoying part being if you do pop-ups in your page, then the chat widget is going to like fight its way to the front and destroy how everything looks, because that's what like chat buttons and chat widgets do. So they came up with a concept called the top layer. And the top layer sits between your page and like the front of the screen. And you can't build up things in the top layer. You can only say like this element, send it to the top layer. And then if you're done with that, you can say this element, send it to the top layer. And it'll just be like in front of your web page. And so that solves a lot of problems really elegantly, because like it's just HTML, CSS, but it's not blocking the JavaScript. It's not part of the browser UI. And the reason why you wouldn't want to do that, because of like Z-index fighting, they fixed that as well. So it's a really complete solution for a very specific problem that I also think is still being slept on. And then there's loads of stuff like that. I could keep going. Another one that is really cool recently is all the stuff around popovers.
Popovers, that's the one I was going to throw out. What a lifesaver. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and then like popovers save you from having to know how React Portal works, because popovers also live in the top layer. And then,
okay, interesting.
Yeah.
That's how they stay separated and okay. Very cool.
And then, from that comes anchor positioning, which is like you have a popover that you want to show somewhere, but you want to show it like attached to the button you just clicked. So how do you link that? Well, you link it with anchor positioning. There's still things you lose there compared to like what native applications can do. So in native applications, if you have like a context menu, the context menu can happily like be outside of the main window, which isn't something you can do in a browser, but that's a choice. You probably don't want popovers to like peek out of the bottom of your browser window.
Probably not.
It would be nicer, but also potentially confusing, because that again crosses the boundary between
right,
like web content and browser UI. But all those things like dialog and popover, etc., anchor positioning, invoker commands, which are like, what if you can just add an attribute to the button to say this opens the popover, rather than having to wire up all the JavaScript. All that is fairly new. So you can be forgiven for like not having implemented something that landed in browsers like half a year ago. Whereas, like I said earlier, INTL has been baseline widely available since 2017, just almost a decade. So we should all just go for that whenever we have something to format.
Biggest win.
Yeah.
Killian telling us this is the biggest win, people. Wake up. But all the other stuff is cool too. So
yes,
use it.
Very cool. Yeah.
And you mentioned native. I'm not sure. I'm out of my depth here, so I just got to ask the question. Do you see the browser war development epic of mankind right now in any way delving down into trying to pull native APIs into the browser surface from the host?
In what sense?
Like like through WebAssembly, through native GPU acceleration. Like I know there's been projects in the past that tried to like paint every single DOM transformation as a CSS array mat, like stuff like that.
Oh yeah. I mean, so there is WebGL and now WebGPU, which I am very unfamiliar with. So I can't really help or give any sort of
strong opinion
right. on that. Other than that, I think like WebGPU is becoming more interesting as sort of like the version 2 of how this should work. And then also because we've now all realized that GPUs are very useful for something other than drawing pixels. I think a lot of interest is going to go there. And then for all the rest, like I'm sure there are really legitimate uses of like WASM and WebAssembly, probably that I use that I don't even realize that I use on websites out there. But they all seem like hyper specific and not necessarily something you would end up adopting on a general web page.
Yeah, that's the general read I've been getting when we talk about WebAssembly and stuff. It's always very pointed use case, and it's you're trying to find where it would make sense. So I was just curious, like, because you're at this more agnostic layer of making Polypane, like what's out there. But it's a similar read. You're giving a similar read on that stuff. And where we stand, at least right now, it's March, it's 2026. Who knows what we'll bring. Well, Killian, we're running up on time here. And I just want to remind viewers, Killian, everything we've talked about here, you can see in even more detail if you want to talk about specific APIs and INTL on the YouTube video, which we'll link down below. If people are listening right now and they're wondering like, oh my gosh, this sounds cool. Like, I don't want to rip out Moment.js. I don't want to rip out date-fns. But I want to do something here. I want to take something that Killian talked about and move forward with it. What's like the lowest bar to entry of just like using the INTL API in a way that's not a toy example on an app that you could imagine people integrating?
Yeah. So what I think is useful to keep in mind, like the INTL API lets you format the following things: dates, numbers, and that includes things like currencies and sizes, lists. So if you have a list of things and you don't want to array loop over them, you can use INTL.list format to create like a nice A, B, and C, or C. There is the segmenter API, which if you're building like a Twitter style UI and you want a little widget that shows how many characters you have left, then you will need to count those characters. And the segmenter API lets you do that. So it lets you count in a given string, like the characters, the words, and the sentences. And the interesting thing there is that you might be thinking now, well, there's just string.length, but .length doesn't count characters. It counts Unicode car codes. So if you have an emoji, which is usually like a ligature of a number of different character codes, you get a length that you don't expect. So there's the emoji of like a family, like a mom and a dad and 2 kids. That's like one emoji. But if you do .length, you get 11 because it's constructed out of 11 characters. Which makes sense if you build Unicode, but it doesn't make sense if you're a human because you see one emoji. Right. So you go, there's one character here. The segmenter API understands that. And if you ask it how many characters are in this, they call it graphemes, which is like a graphical character as a user would perceive it. It will go like, there's one there. You can see that. I can see it. There's one there. And it also does it for words, which again in English is pretty easy. Like you just, break a string or split a string on spaces. But there's plenty of languages that don't use spaces. And then you're out of luck. But the Segmenter API does know how words work in 7,000 languages. So you can build interesting UIs in that way. And then the last one that, again, is very specific. There's a collator, which don't ask me what the word means exactly, but that will let you sort strings in a locale-aware way. So say you have an index of first letters, so A, B, C, etc. By default, all the sorting UIs will use American English, or more specifically, they will use the Unicode code points. So A to Z comes first, and then all the weird characters in all the other languages that aren't English. So if you have, for example, Spanish, then there's the Ñ, which is the N with the little squiggle on top. It will put that after Z because, it has a really high Unicode code point. So it's clearly, if you sort it, that should be all the way back there. But in Spain, that sits right between the N and the O. So that's where a Spanish person will look for the Ñ. So if you use Collator to sort, that will just work. And it will also work for like all the weird Icelandic characters or the AE character in Danish or, whatever. So those are the ones like, if you have something to format a date, a number, a list, or something to sort or count, Segmenter or Collator, you can just use that instead of something else, like right in the moment, and you don't lose anything because it's already included in the browser. Like there's no download cost, there's no interpreting cost. You can use it for the very specific thing that you're trying to format right now, and still use the logic side of date functions and moments elsewhere.
Good entry point. And it's like pointed. So it's like something that you can grab on and just surgically go on bit by bit.
Exactly.
Thanks for those suggestions. And Killian, thank you for your time, giving us this knowledge.
My pleasure.
There's very few people that sit in this intersection of all the browsers and then going okay, but how does it look for devs? What are devs doing? So I hope that we can have you on again in the future to also check on Polypane and
always happy
how you're integrating with the market and stuff. But this has been great. I've definitely learned a lot myself about these APIs, right? We talk about some browser APIs here on the podcast, but this one in particular hasn't come up yet. So it's been a pleasure.
Yes, likewise. Thanks for having me.